It is 2953 of the Third Age. Erebor has been reclaimed. Sauron has fled from Mirkwood into Mordor to begin his pursuit for the One Ring. And the last meeting of the White Council has tasked Gildor Inglorion with assembling a fellowship to stop Umbarian pirates from assembling ancient artifacts from a Second Age prophecy. Join the players of this Adventures of Middle-earth Dungeons & Dragons campaign as they unravel the mysteries of the prophecy. Welcome to Arda in Part 1 of the Inglorion Bastards trilogy, Search for Tol Arasia.
All right, well, welcome to another episode of the Inglorion Bastards podcast. This is episode 21, and this is another one of those recap episodes that we've done. I think this is the third one, and tonight we have with us my friend Josh, who played Raiken. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, man. Thank you.
And so just so you know, and I know you've listened to them, but what we do here is we kind of talk a little bit about, I have some kind of questions that I ask you, and then I think you can just kind of also talk about anything that you want to. But I will say that, we're on, I've explained this to everybody before, but we played sort of 3-hour sessions when we played, and we did kind of like 10-week sessions, right? So we would do 3 hours for episode 1, 3 hours for episode 2, and what I'm doing now is kind of cutting those episodes into like 4 or 5 pieces.
Okay.
And so we just, for you and I, we finished episode 4, but for the reader or for the listener, they're on episode 21.
Okay.
So I remember, so you've been present for at least 3 of those 4 episodes, and it was very noticeable the day that you couldn't make it. I think that was the day that we went to the Withered Heath. Maybe were you with us for that?
No, that was when I couldn't make it, and I was not there.
And I just wanted to say that I've noticed now editing these, like how much you brought to the production value. So and to like and to RP Raiken, yeah. So I guess maybe my first question, and this kind of leads into it, would be if you could talk a little bit about your experience with both Dungeons and Dragons and with Tolkien and Lord of the Rings before this campaign. Oh
yeah, absolutely. I guess starting with Lord of the Rings because honestly, and it kind of gives me like goosebumps all over my body, which is really weird. I just got goosebumps just now. A lot of stuff in my life actually starts with Lord of the Rings because because I'm a video game designer now, which is kind of what leads up to all this. But I got, when I was a kid, I found in a box of like my dad's stuff, an older illustrated version of The Hobbit.
Nice.
It was illustrated by Alan Lee. Is that who it is?
That's it.
It is, right?
Yep, it is.
The guy did the original illustrations, and at the time, as a little kid, I had a lot of trouble learning to read when I was younger. And when I found that book, I really wasn't. I was actually quite old. I mean, I might have been like 10, but I really was not reading up to my level yet. But because it had the illustrations in it, I was able to sort of like follow along with the story. So I like, before I could even read it, I looked through that book of the illustrations of the Hobbit and followed Alan Lee's illustrations through the book before I could really even read it. So that was like my first exposure to Tolkien. And then, of course I learned to read better, and I was able to actually read it, and I sort of fell in love with it, and then read it like 11 times, 12 times, 22 times. I don't know. I read it a bunch. It was one of the only things in my life that I really read religiously like that, and I still have it to this day. I'm going to give my son into it as soon as I can. But that was like, what? Go ahead.
Oh no, I was just going to say, the Hobbit, it was really meant for Tolkien's son, and so it was kind of like juvenile literature, but it is so much fun to read, and I couldn't agree with you more.
Yeah, I think you're right. It was kind of like, it was a little more lighthearted. I don't know. I want to say lighthearted, but yeah, I know what you mean. It was a little bit more juvenile, I guess, for sure, and it was a little bit more of a. It's funny because when I think about reading that and then learning about the Lord of the Rings and then seeing the changes, feeling the changes that story went through to sort of fit with the Lord of the Rings and all that kind of stuff, it was definitely an evolution. But as I grew up, when I was a kid, I liked the Hobbit a lot because it was like a small tale and it was something I could really wrap my head around, and at the same time it was in this world that felt so rich, of course, because that's the thing that Tolkien did so well, right? But like as I grew up, I started to really internalize like the depth of his lore, if that makes any sense. Like now as an adult, I realize that as a kid, the things that appealed to me were things like Frodo being just a normal person. As a kid, you think, oh, that's so cool. You know, he's just this little dude. He's just this little hobbit, and he's going on this grand adventure.
Yeah, that could be me, right? Like, yeah,
that could be me exactly.
Yeah.
And you know, and then that story kind of grew with me, where it's like, okay, well, now that grand adventure he went on actually seems quite small compared to the things that you know his relatives and the future of his legacy would hold. But I grew up getting into the Lord of the Rings, and that stuff really inspired me to play and then get into video game development. It really was that. I really think that having that book, as funny as it seems, was like the genesis of my love for video game development, because because you know I've been lucky to make a few different fantasy games here and there, and that love for that kind of lore got me into making worlds of my own.
Yeah. Well, I think probably Tolkien had that influence on a lot of people.
I think that's definitely true. And it's funny, I always wonder like how broad that influence actually is, because it must be more than we can even imagine, you know?
Right. Well, he did kind of birth a genre, so to speak, you know?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. And it's funny because as an adult, I've learned about how he kind of like rebirthed the genre. He brought some of this old style lore that people told each other for, you know, thousands of years, and turned it into a more modern thing. And then the modernity of that is like, it's years and years and years later, generations later now, several generations later, and it's still really applicable to people that they really can get into it.
Well, if I could bridge that gap a little bit for our listeners, if our listeners are not Tolkien experts, what Josh is talking about is Tolkien was trying to create a mythology for Britain, for England, and he brought in Scandinavian mythology and all kinds of mythology from all over the world. He made up he was a linguist. He made up languages, and he based languages on again some Scandinavian languages and some Brythonic languages and like Welsh. And yeah, I mean, he definitely took these things, these verbal tales that Josh was talking about, and brought them and sort of sculpted them. And some of his earliest writings, and we'll talk about this sort of later on down the podcast, but some of his earliest writings that really comes out with the Book of Lost Tales, book, especially books 1 and books 2. But thank you for sharing that. And so this transitioned you to Dungeons and Dragons too, I'm guessing, right?
Yeah, of course. I mean, like I had some exposure to Dungeons and Dragons when I was a kid, but the first few times I really played it with a good DM were when I was in college. And it was my freshman year in college, and I had played it a few times before that, but we were young, and I don't think we had we had fun. But it's like when you first encounter your first really talented storyteller as a DM, it changes the whole thing for you. You know,
it's true.
As a kid, we would always try to I think the mistake that we made as kids is we would come up with these, you know, sort of childish little stories, and we would sort of force each other to play through them. But like the first time that I played with a DM who was flexible enough to have the group cooperate in creating the story and allowed the group to enrich the story that they were creating and guided that whole, it was just an amazing experience to step away from that, and that's where it kind of ties into Tolkien to me, to think like, wow, you know, I was just involved in creating this world. I was a part of this world, and not just being a part of someone's story, but like adding to it. You know, that felt really neat, and that's to me that's what Dungeons and Dragons has always been about ever since that point. It's like when I'm DMing, it's about creating a world for people to be in, and then letting them shape it a lot. You know. And then as a player, I always want to try to do that. I always want to try to do the, you know, force the DM to let me do the crazy thing, or try to give the DM some seeds of like backstory for my character that maybe that will roll into the world, which which is something that I thought you did really well in this campaign, which I think that maybe the listeners have already gotten to some of that stuff, but
well, that's,
I think that was something that you did an awesome job with Raiken.
Well, thank you. And as a DM, I've been DMing now for probably, technically I've been DMing since I was a kid when we used to make up our own diceless, role-playing games. I remember we used to play we used to watch X-Men on Saturday mornings and then go play a sort of a diceless X-Men role-playing game at the awesome. Playground. Yeah. But exactly. Yeah. No, but we've been, I've been officially DMing for probably 4 or 5 years and talking with people like you can always learn something from people. And I think that's something that I took away from you, hearing about your campaigns, and that's, letting the players sort of help mold the world. I think sometimes I do that a little too much as a player.
But it's great. It's great. I love that. Honestly, like my, not to sidetrack, but like my last campaign that I did, the players completely screwed it all up. But I mean, they destroyed it. But at the end, they were all like, "This was so amazing," and I'm like, "Oh, why'd you guys stop? You freaking wrecked my thing." But, that's the flavor. To me, that's the real spice of it. It's so different than video games in that when you play a video game, for the most part, you're playing someone's like authored experience for you. And I think that Dungeons and Dragons and role-playing games, like pen and paper role-playing games, can be so much more than that.
Yeah.
And they'll be more than that for probably forever. I mean, the human creativity is something that media can't really replicate.
We're storytellers, aren't we?
I think that's true. It's like humans are made to be storytellers, and pen and paper RPGs and pen and paper games in general are like a vessel for that, for sure.
Well, let's so you talked a little bit about creating worlds and creating characters and having these characters add to the world. So tell us a little bit about Raiken as a character. What was your inspiration for that? How did you? I mean, our fellowship was just so evenly balanced. I mean, we literally had like one of every. Like we had a dwarf, we had an elf, we had a human, we had a Dunedain, we had a woodsman. So how did you come up with Raiken?
I think something that always appealed to me about Tolkien's stuff, and this is where I came up with Raiken, is that there's so many characters. There's like such a great mix of characters in the stories that are either really crucial, almost celestial beings, and then there's just people, and sometimes the people just don't seem to belong, but in the end they always do. So I really wanted to create this person. I really wanted to create a character that was just a person, had problems of his own, and to some extent like just couldn't relate to what might be happening. I didn't know what you were going to do for the story, but I wanted to create this story for this guy that was like very self-centered. He lost his dad, he has a estranged brother, and his whole life basically just became about either his dad and his brother, or as he turned inward, the service of his people. And like his people are very quaint, right? His people are woodmen, and they just kind of keep to themselves. They have a job, they sort of patrol the edges of Mirkwood or whatever, but they kind of keep to themselves. They're not involved in the larger scale events of this world.
Right.
And I always loved those characters, and Tolkien, Tolkien stuff always has those things, from the hobbits, all the way up to even people like Strider, who ultimately was the linchpin of the whole thing. But for a long time of his life, he was just a dude,
Yeah, well, so speaking of just dudes, I mean, this comes up in the campaign quite a bit, but I've drawn a lot of parallels between Raiken and Boromir in the past, and I think we're going to see more of that as Raiken goes through his trials, and I can say that looking back on it, we basically did sort of 3 arcs, right? Part 1, Part 2, and Part 3, or Act 1, Act 2, and Act 3. In Search for Tol Eressëa, you were with us. In the next part, The Rise of the Mormogil, you were with us, and you took Part 3 off, but you came back sort of with us at the end of Part 3, and I can say through the course of Act 1 and Act 2, Raiken evolves more than any other character, and in a very sort of Boromir-esque fashion. And I don't want to give too much away for the listeners because we haven't gotten there yet. But I do want to sort of preview the really exciting character development that Raiken goes through. I mean, what do you think of that?
Yeah, I mean, I thought it was fascinating what you did with the character. Because I think a lot of his development is spurred on by the story. Like he has this whole adventure for him was quite a deep struggle, I think. And I don't know if this is the parallel you were trying to draw to Boromir, but I feel like he struggled with leaving his people. He struggled with. Before that, he struggled with his brother and his father, but he struggled with leaving his people, being sent on this mission to do this thing. I think he struggled a little bit because he felt out of place with these people in that initial part. It's like some of these people he knew right away were had lineages that were important, and were people like elves and things like that just kind of were beyond his station in life. And I think it started from there, and it just evolved into this really deep, I hate to say struggle, because it wasn't like he just suffered, but he did suffer quite a lot.
He did suffer more than I think maybe any other character. And
he suffered quite a lot, for sure.
But at the same time, I mean, he's also like this Frodo character in a sense, because the listeners do know at this point that these Umbarian pirates are sort of collecting these items, and and at this point in the story, the characters have sort of recovered that which has escaped the void, the sword, Angwarel. They have recovered the Elendil stone, the Palantiri from Elostirion, but they're not really sure at this point what to do with these items, and they know they're being pursued by this wolf from Mordor, and so they're just trying to get through the Mirkwood, and they're about to sort of go to Mountain Hall and celebrate Yule with your people, but in the end, it's Raiken who ends up making one of the most pivotal decisions of the final battle of Act 1 in the search for Tol Eressëa. And so all of this is sort of coming up. So he's this amalgam of like Frodo and Boromir, and he's this regular dude.
That's true.
Yeah.
He's like the most reluctant character, but I think you're right. He did have some really clutch moments, and some of those clutch moments I think he suffered for greatly. But
yeah, for sure.
But it's funny for me. It's funny to think about. Like, I wanted to create this everyman, not even everyman, like no man really, just kind of guy who had his own problems. And I think in my mind, like his psyche was that like he just never really. And this is the Frodo and Bilbo part where it's like he just never really belonged to do this, right? But as things evolved, he ended up. It's almost like his fate really was. This really was designed to be his fate, right? The events of this story really were. It's great in that Tolkien way, and this is a credit to you. I think it came out really great in that Tolkien way, in that this relatively meaningless person was raised up in almost like a cosmic fashion, where it's like destiny, right? That he would be in these places at these times, and that it would be him that would make certain decisions at these times.
Yep.
Even though he was just like the reluctant guy, and I think I actually really like the fact that he ended up suffering quite a lot, both mentally and physically, and facing some of these really crazy. Because you have in the story where they're at right now, they've already been to like the pit and all that kind of stuff and found his brother.
Yeah, the old well. That's right.
Yeah, the old well. Yeah, so that was a crazy moment. That's actually one of my favorite moments of the early campaigns, where it was like he finds his brother. They find the well. They find his father's skeleton, essentially his father's dead body.
Right.
And to snap his brother out of this crazy trance that he's in, he ends up shooting his father in the face with a bow and arrow. And it's just like, his father's been dead for his whole life, basically, for the last, 15 or 20 years or whatever it is. And but just like that, that at that moment was like, this is kind of crazy. Why did he do that? But it snapped his brother out of the crazy business, right? And they ended up escaping, and that was a small moment of sacrifice that actually ends up being relatively pleasant compared to some of the other things that happened.
It's true, but it was the first of the biggies.
Yeah.
So we have so we've been talking a lot about tragedy, but let's talk about something more positive. What is without giving too much away? Is there something that the listener has to look forward to in this last? I would say we'll probably have another 15 to 20 episodes here in this second half of the first arc. Is there something that you can tell the listener to look forward to?
It's hard without giving away anything specific. But I would say that like all of the tragedy and all of the evolution for all of the characters, it really does pay off in a great way. I did miss a bunch of that third session where there's closure for some of that stuff, but I feel like that in the same way that you have like Frodo coming out of the Shire, or Samwise coming out of the Shire and like meeting elves and meeting these people that are beyond his station, and then ultimately contributing in a really big way. You have this character like Raiken, you have these characters like Burin, you have characters like Faradir and stuff like that go through these trials and tribulations and discover that this is where they were supposed to be. So I think like without giving away any specifics, I would say that like that's the thing that was so rewarding about this story, was that there's like, it was like you said, suffering and trials and stuff like that, but then there was these ultimate payoffs for these people,
Yeah. Well,
even for Raiken, like meeting some of those people that were beyond him, and having those people honor him was like more than he ever could have asked for in his life. That's something that's going to happen in the future. He's going to be sort of honored and taken care of by some of these people who never would have thought cared about him, Yeah. And I think it's because of his actions, but yeah, that's.
Well,
his dog. I'm excited about Bear.
Yeah, well, Bear has been in the story a little bit, and he's going to come into the story even more in the next couple of episodes. So we won't keep you anymore tonight. The next couple of episodes will probably be the Yule celebration at Mountain Hall. And I'm still there's actually some specific moments for Raiken in there that were pretty awesome too. Yeah, they were. So we go from a great tragedy to a celebration in a Tolkien kind of way, but maybe that was a cool moment. But maybe in the second arc in Rise of the Mormagil, we can have you back and to talk again.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. I would love to. And I think in closing, like I really do hope that people out there that love the Tolkien lore and stuff like that can see the effort that you put into making this story, because I think the thing that I appreciated about the story, beyond like the evolution of the characters and cool encounters that we had, was that you put in a lot of effort to tell a story that was important to the broader lore of the Tolkien universe, and tried really hard to not step on any of it. It was like, no, let's not make a story where it's like we're going to step on some of the events that happened in the Lord of the Rings but those things, we got the sense when we were playing the game that those things were happening and evolving, and we were taking part in that, but we had our own unique part to play that was really well crafted into the lore without damaging anything.
Thank you, man. I'm getting a little teary over here.
Sorry,
no. That's cool. That's the I think the fun part about, if you talk to anybody who's written historic fiction, I mean, when you're weaving your story into, it's like putting together a puzzle, and Tolkien is really like that. It's like you're reading real history.
Yeah, absolutely.
But again, thank you for coming, and we'll see you again soon, I hope.
Anytime, yeah. Let me know. I'll be here.
All right, man. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Though this marks the end of the episode, the road goes ever on. Until next time, join us at longwinded.one and consider giving us a review on Apple Music, Spotify, or really whichever platform you choose.